go ahead and name, age, and where
Robert
you
Summers,
grew up.
and I'm a local. I grew up here in Glen Rose, born here in 1940, and lived here pretty much all my life except for a short stint in the Army. A couple other things that took me out for a few months, but I've been here all my life.
Okay, can you start with when you were young and some of the old timers you met and knew? And
Well, I was privileged to have lived right next door to a man we called Bull Adams, Ernest Tolbert Adams. He just was about 100 steps away from my house. And he was such an interesting fellow that he loved to talk about Indians, dinosaurs, you just name it, everything a kid likes to hear. And was quite an expert in most of those fields.
so what would be your relationship with him and the tracks?
Well, probably no relationship between me and him and the tracks, except for the fact that he was the first one that I know about that knew what they were. His brother George had found them during the summer, and he was just kicking around the rocks up a creek here in town. Actually, it was Wheeler Branch. It wasn't the Paluxy. The Paluxy became widely known later, and when they really started looking for them then, and they knew what to look for. But the first one, I believe, was found on Wheeler Branch, closer into town. And when he came home from school that weekend, his brother George said, "E.T., let's go out to the creek. I want to show you something." Found something really strange. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of a track, I think, but I don't know what it is. And he said, "Well, let's take a look at it." So he went out and he said, "It's a dinosaur track. Where'd you find it? And when did you find it?" He said, "Well, a couple of days ago." Anyway, they pretty much made the papers. Quite a few years after that, he got Dr. Bird from New York to come down, and they excavated a very large track of those. Went to the Museum of Natural History in New York and other places. They sent a few to other places. And some of those tracks would hold up to, I think some of them said 16 gallons of water. So really big track, sauropods, really big. Well, I used to have a photograph of one of the local kids bathing in one of them. And he was like 4 or 5 years old, not very big, but it was just kind of a publicity stunt for the Star-Telegram, Fort Worth.
Is that the Tommy Pendleton picture?
Yeah, I think it was his name. I knew some of the relatives. I never knew him because he was a little older than me.
So how old were you when you remember first seeing the tracks?
Probably 5 or 6.
And you
5 or
just
6.
were out
And it was
fishing, or
I'm sorry?
what were you just playing in the creek, or how did you come across them?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'd heard about them, and I guess we probably took a little family outing, picnic, and so forth when I turned and looked at them, and they were pretty well old news by then. By the time I was 5 or 6, and that would have been in like 45. These tracks were excavated probably 10, 15 years earlier, and so most of the town folks knew about them, and it was one of those things that was really exciting for a while, and then it just kind of died out, and they said, "Oh, ho-hum, they found another track," that kind of a deal. One of the amazing things that I look back on, and the amazing thing about it is that I wasn't amazed at the time, and we were looking at these tracks, and I walked over to the side, and I said, "Well, they must have been playing with the kids down here, because here's some boy or man tracks right alongside of them," but I didn't think anything about it. And until much, much later, found out the significance of man tracks with dinosaurs. I didn't have a problem with that. And until I started learning some of the things they were teaching in schools, man came along a long time after the dinosaurs, supposedly, allegedly. And I said, I don't know how that could be, because I've seen these tracks out there. I'm not a paleontologist, but I am an artist, and even at 9 or 10 years old, I was already drawing, and I could recognize shapes and proportions. I mean, that's what art is,
So you actually brought it up to your school teachers in school?
I mentioned it to a few people, said, it's just pock marks in the creek, whatever, you know, some. I said, left and right pock marks with toes. And he said, well, you don't know what you're looking at. And I said, okay, whatever you say, but I think I understand what a human footprint looks like. And then later, after, you don't really have to study art or paleontology to recognize a human footprint. That's just ingrained in us. It's second nature to humankind to recognize its own likeness, so to speak. And it's just amazing how they can come out to look at them and still say, well, it was this caused this and this. They've even gone as far as some saying that it was probably some type of a growth or a wart on the bottom of the dinosaur's foot that left those tracks. I said, and they move a little bit around with each step in different positions. That's that is stretch. That's a stretch. Normally, when we'd have company or whatever, family that hadn't seen the tracks, we would take them to the closest area, so we wouldn't have to hunt around all afternoon for them. And I knew exactly where some of the better ones were, so we just park our car fairly close, and we still had to walk down the embankment, across the creek to get over to them. But it's fun to watch people the first time they've ever seen it, because they just can't believe it. You mean that was made there 100 million years ago? I said, no, more like 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, but whatever you want to believe about that part of it. And I said, it's lithified in stone now, and pretty well preserved. Some of them were exceedingly well preserved, and I think they were probably after a flood, some new ones exposed, and they're going to be really sharp, being exposed for the first time. The elements really take a toll quickly. It's just the atmosphere eats on them, and it's just amazing how quickly they erode. Some of them, especially, if they're not really hard lithified, they can really just dissolve, in just a few years.
Talk about meeting Carl Baugh and how you guys met.
I'm an artist by profession, and I was I was working late one night because I was pushing hard for an art show to get some things ready. My wife and a friend of hers were at the Dairy Queen going to something to drink. I think it was on Saturday night. I believe it was Saturday. And my wife overheard Carl and this gentleman talking, and she said, they're talking about some really interesting things, Bob. You really should come. She called me, and I said, boo, I'm very busy. And she said, oh, yeah, but you can take a Coke break, surely. And she said, they're talking about dinosaurs and man tracks and Paluxy. And I said, oh. I said, oh, well, maybe I'll come down and have a Coke then. So I did, and by the time I got there, he was already standing ready to meet me when I walked in the door, because she had introduced herself and said, my husband's coming down here to meet you. And so he was standing there with Professor M.E. Clark, and I met those two gentlemen for the first time. Was that 83, Carl? Was that 83 or 8? That's what I was thinking. It was 83. And it was summer. It was during the summer. I don't remember the exact day. But we got to visiting, and he said, do you have a few minutes? I said, I'm really pretty busy. He said, I can give you a 15-minute, 30-minute, hour, 2-hour, whatever you want. I said, let's go for 30 minutes. And he said, okay. So he drove us out here, or I followed him out, and he had a little log cabin set up out here. I didn't even know about that. And he was in a green Jeep, Willis Jeep. And so I told him before we stepped in the door, I said, now really, I don't want to be rude, but I only have about 20, 30 minutes. He said, that's fine. Most gracious person I ever met. And so he started showing me some things, and I'm looking at them, and I said, this is not exactly what I've been taught, And but here it is, and I'm starting looking at some things. But finally, I looked down at the end. He had some glass cases with displays, and I'm looking at this thing. I said, that can't be what I'm looking at, And whatever he was telling me, I think he was talking about bombardier beetles or something. And my eye kept going to this rock, the geo-looking thing, with a man-made hammer in the middle of it, stuck in the middle of it, with the impression around. I said, I said, Dr. Boss, excuse me just a second. Can we just walk down here and let me look at that? And he took it out of the case. I said, no, you don't have to do that. He said, no, I want you to look at it and hold it. He said, I want you to tell me what you think about it. And I'm looking at it really, really close. I said, and he was so nice. He was just absolutely silent. But my mind was going like this. I said, no, this can't be. And I'm looking at it. I said, I can fake things. I can make fake things probably as well as the next guy. And I'm looking at it, and I said, Dr. Ball? He said, yes. And I said, this is real. He said, well, what do you think? And I said, I'm not a geologist, but I know this is a very old layering because of the inclusions and the shell and the stuff that's stuck in it. I said, this is really old material. He said, would you believe Ordovician? I said, that far down? I think since then they've decided it's a sandstone from, but still quite old. I mean, from the geology handbooks. And I'm looking at it, and I said, this goes against the grain of what I've been taught, but I've never particularly believed it, that this world is millions and millions of years old. I said, I've always had a little trouble with that, but I said, to me, this can't be. I said, anyway, this is what really got me started thinking about it.
Did you ever see any, what his experience were with seeing prominent tracks or even putting his foot in one, very personal, down-to-earth experience?
Well, I mean, I guess we all do that. I mean, especially when you're younger, going down the creek and you got to put your foot in those tracks. It's just, hey, take a picture of my foot in the track, that kind of thing. And so we all did that, I guess. And as far as any prominent tracks, I don't really know that what we were looking at were any that were. I'm kind of believing that some of those tracks that I saw, the man tracks, that the Willett track is that we believe came from that area that I looked at as a kid, but most of them were gone because that Paluxy River is a terrifying stream when it really gets out of its banks. I mean, it is a terrible stream, and there are rocks coming down at the size of Volkswagens, and it tears things up. And so when you have the opportunity to observe or mold a track, you better do so pretty quickly, because I've been told it's the second fastest falling stream in the Southwest. And it really, I mean, just a matter of a few hours, if we get large rainfall north of us, about 16 miles where it headwaters, it can be terrifying. You see a 16-foot wall of water coming down those banks, and I've seen 16 feet of water in there, up to the bridge that goes across the bridge down here on 67.